Hello class, welcome to lesson 3.1, which is all about fractions and decimals. By the end of this lesson, you should be able to write fractions as terminating or repeating decimals and compare fractions and decimals. So some quick vocab, a terminating decimal is a decimal whose digits end. So an example, if I said 0.25, that's an example of a terminating decimal, or even if I said 0.1. That number stops, okay? Terminating means it stops. A repeating decimal is a decimal where one or more digits repeat without an end. So an example of that would be if I said 0.333. So this is a common one that you guys are maybe familiar with. We use it usually to represent 1/3. And a faster way of writing it than having to write out all of those threes is to use something called bar notation. So that's when you write 0.3, and then this bar tells me that it continues on forever and ever without me actually having to write that. Another one could be if I had two numbers repeating, that would be the same as 0.18181818, and it would go on forever and ever. So you can see that using bar notation makes it easier to write decimals, repeating decimals. So let's start by talking about terminating decimals. So those decimals that come to an end. The first method that we can use to solve these is using long division. So if I have 8 as a denominator, it goes on the outside, and I put my numerator on the inside. And then 8 cannot go into 7, so I'm going to put a decimal and then add a 0. Since 8 goes into 7 0 times, I'll put a 0 there. 8 goes into 70 8 times, right? You want to see how many times can it go in without going over. So in this case, 8 times 8 is 64. So now I'm going to do 70 minus 64, which is 6. I add another 0, and I bring it down. So now I say how many times can 8 go into 60? It can go in 7 times. 8 times 7 is 56. And if I subtract those, I get 4. I'm going to grab another 0, and I have 8 goes into 40 5 times, and that works out perfectly. So now I don't have any remainders left. So I know that this terminating decimal is 0.875. Okay. Then let's go over here and look at 3/16. So again, the denominator goes outside of the division bar, and your numerator goes on top. 16 can't go into 3, so I'm going to put a 0. 16 can go into 30 one time. So 30 minus, 16, sorry. 30 minus 16 is 14, the number that I was just trying to write. And I bring a 0 down. So how many times can 16 go into 140? Well, I know it's not 10 times, because 10 times 16 is 160. So if I do 140 divided by maybe like, let's see. 16 times 9, I'd get 144. That's still too high, so I'm going to try 16 times 8. And I have 16 times 8 is 128. And if I subtract those, I'm left with 12. So I've got to keep going. I know this is a terminating decimal, so I know I'll get to an end at some point. 16 can go into 120. I'm going to guess 7 times, right? Because 16 times 8 was 128. So 7's probably a pretty good guess. 16 times 7 is 112. And if we subtract those, that is an 8. And 16 can go into 80 5 times. 16 times 5 is 80, sorry. So that was 5, and now I don't have a remainder. So I know 3/16 is the same as the decimal 0.1 0.875. Now, using long division is the first method we can use to solve these problems. However, there's a second one that you guys are probably already asking, why are we not doing this? And that's just to use a calculator and literally type into a calculator 7 divided by 8, and you would get 0.875. And you'd say, Ms. Johnson, that's so much faster. Why are we not doing that? Because honestly, you're going to have to be able to do some sort of long division on your own at various times in your life. Most of the time, will you have a calculator? Yes. But there are still times where we're going to test your knowledge to see if you can do it without a calculator. So you can assume that using long division, we're going to use the least, and I will let you use your calculator the most, but there will still be times. And same thing goes up here. If you typed in 3 divided by 16, you would end up at 0.1875. Okay? Repeating decimals. So I'm going to do it the faster way this time because I did long division on both of the last problems. So I'm going to type into my calculator -5. Make sure you don't use the subtraction symbol for that. -5 divided by 6. And -5 divided by 6 is -0.83333. So I'm going to use that bar notation to signify that that 3 just keeps repeating. And that is my answer. Then over here, I'm going to type in 2 divided by 11 into my calculator. And I get 0.181818. But instead of writing it that way, I'm going to do the faster method and write the bar over both of those numbers because they are both repeating. And careful if you box your answers not to do what I just did. The box kind of lined up with the bar. Don't make me question whether or not you have a bar written above your numbers. Now let's practice comparing the numbers. There are a couple of different ways we can do this. The first one is you can type into your calculator -5 divided by 8, and you can say, hey, that's -0.625, and then -6 divided by 9, and you'd get -0.666, or, the 6 repeating. Which one of those is bigger? Well, since they're both negative, be careful. Since they're both negative, 0.625, the -0.625 is actually greater. Another way to try this out, or to test out which fraction is bigger, is if you were to take these fractions, and if you multiply on the diagonal, so do some cross products. So if I do 8 times -6, I get a -48 over here. And if I do -5 times 9, I get -45. So which one is bigger, -45 or -48? -45. So you know that the sign goes that way. Okay? So that's a way to do it if you don't feel as confident comparing decimals right away. Then over here, I have 1 as a decimal and 1 as a fraction. Usually the fastest way to solve these is to just turn them both into decimals. So 7 divided by 8, we already talked about earlier, 0.875. So is 0.875 greater than, less than, or equal to 0.87? Well, we have 3 digits here, and we only have 2 here. So I'm going to add that third one, just to make it a little easier to compare. So what is bigger, 875 or 870? That would be the one with the 5, okay? Now let's talk about a word problem. 30 out of 36 freshmen, so 30 out of 36 freshmen, that's how you would write it as a fraction, and 34 out of 40 sophomores participated in a marathon for charity. Which class had a greater fraction participating in the marathon? So if we look, we have to figure out which fraction is bigger. So you can either multiply 30 times 40, which is 1200, and then 36 times 34, which is 1224, and you would see that the sophomores had greater participation. Or another way you could do it is convert them to decimals. So 30 divided by 36 is 0.83 repeating, and 34 divided by 40 is 0.85. And you can see, again, I got that the sophomores had greater participation in the charity. So that would be my final answer. If you have questions about anything I explained in this video, please let me know. Actually, one last thing I will say is in past years, you've probably been taught that when you're comparing fractions, you need the same denominator, and you've been changing it so you have the same denominator. If you feel comfortable with that and you want to make it, and you want to use that method, I'm fine with that. It just usually takes a little bit longer than these methods that I've showed you today, but it is another acceptable way to solve the problem. Okay, so if you have any questions, let me know. I'd be happy to help, and have a great day.